Hi, welcome back to the BlockShow. We're in the second day, and we've had the fantastic Jimmy Wales, the founder and CEO of Wikipedia and Wikimedia, just speak on the main stage. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
So you were talking on the main stage about disinformation and about spreading false information on a wider scale. What is your opinion when it comes to the blockchain, the blockchain community? Because we've heard a few different opinions on, for example, ICOs in the past from you.
Yeah, so I mean, I think one of the things that I think anybody who's been in the media, and actually a lot of journalists will recognize the frustration. I remember I think the first time I was ever asked really in an interview about ICOs, I said, well, I'm very skeptical. A lot of them appear to be scams or they're not going to work. And then the headline said, Jimmy Wales, ICOs are scams. And it's like, I didn't say ICOs are scams. I said a lot of them are. And I think that's quite a reasonable opinion. If I just said ICOs are scams, that's not very reasonable. It's a new funding mechanism, of course, very interesting. But being a bit of a bubble and mania, people are getting very excited about things that don't necessarily make a lot of sense. We see a lot of the typical bubble behaviors of people, kind of greater fool theory. Well, if I can get in early and get a 20% discount, then it doesn't matter if it doesn't make sense because it's going to go up that much and I can sell then. Yeah. And all those bad behaviors come out, a lot of hyping and so on. And then we have, a lot of news floating around, and we have, frankly, a traditional news media that has, by and large, fallen down on the job here for some reasons that are understandable and forgivable, and for some reasons that I think we can be a little more critical of. So what I mean by that is, it's a new technology. It's very complicated for most people. The first time you begin to try to get your head around cryptocurrency, and I come from a background where I understand public key cryptography. I'm not an expert, but I'm familiar with these things for many years. And even then, it's hard to really get your head around how it all works. And so you have journalists covering it who really barely understand what's going on. They barely understand anything about finance. And that's kind of understandable. It's new technology. It's hard to cover. But also, I think we should see a lot more investment in serious journalism, from the traditional media in this space, because it is a place where you can be, whether you're positive or negative about it, it's interesting, right? So if your view of crypto is it's all nonsense in a bubble and it's all going to go away in 5 years, then you can cover it from that perspective and just say, look, there's a lot of scams out there. If you think this is actually a fundamental shift in technology that's going to change everything, you can cover it from that perspective and say, what are the interesting bits? What is actually likely to change the world in some new and interesting ways? Because not all of it will. And so I'd just like to see a lot more serious, thoughtful journalism in this space.
So you're mentioning a lot about disinformation, and what we've seen in the world in the last kind of decade is there's a lot of different industries that have been affected by disinformation. They're, without mentioning the obvious one, with a political aspect, but also on social media. So it's not just cryptocurrency that's been affected by how the traditional media kind of portrays different scenarios. What do you think we could do as a community to actually turn around this tide of negative news and actually get back to a more integral, factual reporting?
Well, I mean, I think there's been some really good news. So one of the pieces of good news is there's still, despite massive layoffs in the industry, there's still a lot of really thoughtful and really serious journalists who are fighting the good fight at traditional publications. A lot of the owners of traditional publications are really focused on trying to maintain their quality brands, even though they're under a financial assault, basically. Some of the things that I've seen that are very optimistic signs, the New York Times, that their digital-only subscriptions have gone from about 1 million to about 3 million in just a couple of years' time. That's really important because revenue from readers is crucial in terms of aligning incentives. I want, as a reader of a publication, I want to feel like these reporters are working for me, right? They're going out and getting information that will be useful to me and to my life. And the truth is, I mean, everybody knows the old saying, if you're not if you're not the customer, you're the product.
Yeah.
And a lot of contemporary news sites, which are advertising only, when you read it, you're not really the customer, right? They're using every manipulative trick in the book to keep your attention and your eyeballs. I think probably almost everybody has had the experience of, you won't believe what this child star looks like now, and you click sort of 15 clicks in to try to find out, and you're like, why am I wasting my life doing this, And that's just using some base human instincts to get you to click and get you curious and get you doing something. It's not serious journalism, and it's not what we really want. In terms of the crypto world, I mean, I think one of the things that I think you will hear from a lot of people in the community is a bit of dismay about the lack of serious research, the lack of serious journalism that's out there. There are obviously some specialist publications. I mean, Cointelegraph, our hosts here, that are doing what they're doing, and that's a good thing. But we need more. We need a lot more.
Yeah, no, I agree. The community is still what we've heard over the last, yesterday from different interviews here in these two chairs is that we've only really developed this community in the last 18 months. It's come from almost nothing to actually being hugely influential. And the questions around, is it a bubble, as you kind of mentioned yourself, they are valid questions.
Yeah.
But the technology has to prove itself. And do you think that being Wikipedia being a community kind of driven site for knowledge, and blockchain and cryptocurrency, actually a lot of people say that it's a response to this kind of disfranchising of people's innovation in the traditional world and wanting to actually come back to working together and providing back to the community. Do you see a lot of parallels between the two?
I do. I mean, I think just speaking at a very, very high level, there is a certain hacker culture, geek culture, which is very much at the core and at the roots of Wikipedia. I mean, we really came from the free software culture, open source software, Creative Commons licensing, all of that. A lot of that same spirit is of geek culture is tied up in the blockchain world, the Bitcoin world, and so forth. Obviously, it's a different culture. It's different elements. Different things are going on. But there is that kind of broad, almost I would call it, the Star Trek optimism about the future. To say there are problems and we are competent to solve those problems. At the same time, there's always the risk of all of that being poisoned by hype, by nonsense, by scams, and so on. And so I think people should be very thoughtful.
So as one of the, we were always talking about also adoption on a large scale of cryptocurrency and being able to pay for it in different services, and Wikipedia accepting it now as a donation. What was the thought process behind accepting that? Was that a very easy kind of, yes, this makes sense, being that?
Yeah, I mean, it's actually quite complicated and quite subtle. I mean, so to some extent, there was a bit of that. So, if people are saying, we want to give you money, but you have to take it in this format, and then you can sell it immediately and get the money you use, kind of hard as a charity to say no to that, right? Yeah. Obviously. I think we're geeks and interested in new technology and so forth. The funny story behind some of this is several years back, for the first time, I'd been reading about Bitcoin for a long time. I actually downloaded some mining software back in the early days, and so I never really had the time to get into it. And then I decided, okay, I should check this out. And so I went on Coinbase and I bought 1/10 of a Bitcoin. And in the checkout process, it said, just like if you check out at Amazon or something, it said, do you want to tweet about your purchase? I'm like, all right, yeah, why not? Click. And so I tweeted, I just bought, 1/10 of a Bitcoin. And somebody then tweeted back to me saying, publish your Bitcoin address and see what happens. And I was like, okay, let me pause for a second, right? I think I do understand that is a safe thing to do, but I better check, right? So I did a quick reading, I'm like, no, that's fine, that's my public address. So I published it, and it took about, I don't remember exactly, but it was something like 2 days. People had given me $20,000 worth of Bitcoin. Wow. And I'm like, okay, that's interesting. And what had happened is on a message board somewhere and on Twitter, people were saying, let's let's force Jimmy Wales to accept Bitcoin at Wikipedia by just showing him what we can do. So obviously they gave it to me personally, but they didn't intend it to be for me personally. So I sold it and donated the money to the Wikimedia Foundation, of course. Had I kept it, I'd buy a house by now, but that's a different story. So that was interesting to say, okay, look, this is a geeky market, and it's people who are fans of Wikipedia, and they do want to give money. But at the same time, I can tell you one of the barriers to adoption is precisely this. If you do A/B testing, and if on the checkout form, if you offer too many checkout options, you actually reduce the total money raised. And that's very well borne out by all of our research. It's particularly true if you offer, do you want to pay with Visa, MasterCard, American Express, PayPal, Bitcoin? Because then people go, ooh, Bitcoin, I've heard about that, and they click and they go read about Bitcoin for an hour, and they forget to actually donate the money. So we don't put it on our main checkout screen. We've experimented with different ways of doing it, because it's not Wikipedia's job to promote Bitcoin. Right? Our job is to raise money to support Wikipedia. And that's a challenge for adoption. I think that will be a challenge that will go away over time, perhaps, if a lot of the other transactional problems with Bitcoin can be worked out, or some other cryptocurrency of the future. But if you're someone like Amazon, for example, they're incredibly scientific. They have huge amounts of traffic. They know how moving every pixel on the screen affects the checkout rate. If they test it, they're going to find, yeah, this would kill us. Like, we can't do this right now. That doesn't mean it'll never happen. It just means there will be quite a long time before we see general adoption. Also, the number of people who actually have Bitcoin and are able to spend it on routine purchases is still incredibly small. It is still, even as much hype and as much noise has gone on, it is still very much a hobbyist community. I'm talking about people with $100 worth of Bitcoin. I guarantee you, everybody who has $100 worth of Bitcoin, not everybody, but 99% are geeks. They're geeks who are interested in the technology, or they're geeks or whatever, or they're interested in what's going on in the world. It's not everybody. It's not everybody's. Your cousins and whatever.
Yeah.
They're not. They've heard about it, and they're like, I don't know. It sounds like I might lose all my money, so I better not do that.
There's still quite a while to evangelize the technology. Yeah. We've also talked a lot here today or yesterday about we're not even really at day one yet. We're still at day 0 trying to get it evangelized, not only in the technology community, but getting it actually to cross that chasm into the public sphere. And just as you said,
and the cautionary note that I would sound for people is, there is no guarantee that you're going to cross that chasm. And so I do think that there are people who are betting their entire life savings on something that may not happen. And I caution against that. If you want to have part of your assets, or you want to invest a lot of your time in the business and in the area, that's perfectly fine. But it's still very early to know. And there are a lot of really serious technological problems to be overcome. Obviously, I'm not saying anything that isn't already well known and well understood, but the environmental impact of proof of work is staggering. And if we think about scaling to a much bigger level, it becomes untenable. So something's got to give there. Figuring out what are some of the solutions around that is not going to take a week. It's going to take years. And so we're here for the long haul.
So just to round up, we're thinking about how to get it into consumers' hands, and something we've talked a lot about here at BlockShow and the conference. And we've heard a lot of different opinions, from creating an application that is easy to use, where the user is not aware that it's tokenized in the background, to actually going out proactively educating individuals, for example, through blogs or posts, and getting into traditional media. What would your kind of advice to companies be, or the community, to actually get it into the hands of individuals, the best route to action?
Well, I think as with any product, I think you can go back to step one, which is to say, is the product better than the alternative? And I think this is going to be a hard thing for some people in the community here, but currently, for my father, we used to say, for my mother. But then people pointed out that's quite sexist. And the truth is, in my household, my mom is the geek. So for my father, for him to say, oh, I think I'm going to keep some of my money in Bitcoin and spend it, it offers zero advantages. His bank, his credit card, everything works perfectly well for him. There's no material incentive for him. If it's cheaper in terms of overall fees, he can't see those fees. He can't know that. It's not cheaper in overall fees yet. And so I think we have to be realistic to say we're not going to get widespread adoption of cryptocurrencies by the general public for consumer uses through PR campaigns or education. And we are going to get it when it's just practical. People can say, oh, yeah, I do this because it gives me X and Y benefits. And I think we're a long way from that. And also we have to remember there are enormous regulatory hurdles that haven't been thrown up yet, but that probably will be. There are a lot of concerns among governments, which I think are not particularly well-founded if they really understood the technology, but concerns that it's some kind of dark secret, all the money will move around and no one can tell what's going on and so on. That's like, yeah, you've had, thousands of years of cash, which is completely untraceable and so on, and we somehow muddled through till now. So a lot of that kind of stuff, though, will lead to dumb regulation that doesn't actually protect consumers, but actually just doesn't make sense. Some smart regulation, which will maybe empower further growth in this area. But there's still so much work to do that, PR campaigns and blog posts aren't really going to do it. No.
Thank you very much, Jimmy. Thank you so much for joining us here.
Super.
Thank you.
Fantastic.